Good morning. In today's headlines, torrential rains and flash floods continue to hammer the U.S. Northeast yesterday. Storms washed out roadways, leaving areas of Vermont inaccessible.
Western leaders gathering at the NATO summit in Lithuania. President Biden reacts to Turkey's U-turn on letting Sweden join NATO.
$1 trillion in 5 weeks. That's how much debt has been added since President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy agreed to a debt limit deal last month. We have the details.
We have updates on a court decision in the Biden administration's censorship case. A federal judge denies a request from the Justice Department.
A huge percentage of young people across the world are victims of sextortion. Online scammers try to take advantage of this group, but we hear from an expert on how to protect yourself.
And we learn how keeping your bone marrow healthy can mitigate your risk of getting leukemia. Good morning. Welcome to NTD. I'm Kevin Hogan.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Evelyn Lee. Today is Tuesday, July 11th.
Can you believe it's been 100 days since Evan Gershkovich has been in that Russian prison?
Wow, incredible. Yeah, there's more of that coming up, right? But first, we want to turn our attention to the diplomatic win for President Biden as Turkey drops its refusal to let Sweden join NATO. Joining us now is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. She's in Lithuania's capital, where NATO leaders are gathering today. Iris, what's the latest development there?
Hey, good morning, Evelyn. So the NATO summit here in Vilnius, Lithuania, kicked off today on a relatively positive note. And Turkey last night made a sudden U-turn by now agreeing to support Sweden's bid to join NATO. And that, of course, solves a major headache for both NATO and Sweden, which are trying to strengthen their defense against Russia. But this development only comes after intense lobbying by Western leaders, including President Biden, who last week hosted the Swedish Prime Minister at the White House, and just yesterday called the Turkish president. And today, while at the NATO summit, President Biden says he looks forward to an expanded alliance.
First time that NATO leaders will meet 31 together, and looking forward to meeting very soon with 32 members, with the addition of Sweden.
And the White House at a press conference this morning in Vilnius says that it's now going to move forward with F-16 sales to Turkey, but also stresses that it's not part of any deal.
President Biden has been clear and unequivocal for months that he supported the transfer of F-16s to Turkey, that this is in our national interests, and he intends to move forward with that transfer in consultation with Congress.
And all this comes as another country, Ukraine, also wants to join NATO. But President Biden made clear last weekend that this would not be the right time, as doing so would mean that the entire NATO would be pulled into the war with Russia. But today the White House added this.
Ukraine has further steps to take along its reform path, but allies will send a united positive signal on Ukraine's path to future membership in the alliance.
And President Biden is set to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday on the sidelines of the two-day NATO summit. And in that evening, President Biden is set to make a major speech about America's position on the world stage. Back to you.
Thank you, Iris. And back to the U.S., the Senate will hold its first ever classified briefing on artificial intelligence today. Administration officials, including Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, will brief senators.
Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says the briefing will show how the government is using AI to protect national security and will shed light on how U.S. adversaries are using it.
Schumer called for comprehensive measures for AI last month, and U.S. lawmakers are urging for quick action to address the potential risks.
That's as governments around the world consider how to mitigate the potential dangers of the emerging technology, which some experts say could remake human society.
And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are back with a full schedule planned.
High-profile hearings and spending bills are top priorities, but there are some road bumps ahead. NTD's Melina Wisecup has updates about what to expect in the People's House this week.
Lawmakers are returning from the July 4th recess with a lot of ground to cover. There's the high interest hearings this week. The FBI Director Christopher Wray will testify to the Republican-led Judiciary Committee. Republicans are likely to grill him on what they describe as the politicization of the nation's most distinguished law enforcement agency. They're likely to grill him on questions related to the raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, as well as documents pertaining to the Biden family's overseas business dealings. Then over on the financial services side, you have that committee prepping for hearings, 4 hearings this week, all on ESG. Then probably the most pressing on the list is for lawmakers to figure out a way to fund the government on time to avoid a government shutdown, which is particularly concerning right now because both the House and the Senate are on a collision course working within different budget caps. Then, of course, tied up in this, there's a national defense bill. Committees in both chambers did already pass their versions of the bill, roughly $880 billion, but the House bill attracted some criticism from Democrats. There were amendments in the House version of the bill that target cultural issues at the Pentagon, such as eliminating critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. It also aimed to aid service members who were kicked out for not taking the vaccine. And the White House has already sent a statement disapproving of these measures, along with others. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The federal debt has gone up $1 trillion in the last 5 weeks. That was when President Biden signed a debt ceiling bill into law to avert default. Now, with concerns of a government shutdown growing, a group of 21 Republicans is giving House Speaker Kevin McCarthy an ultimatum. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg tells us more.
The U.S. national debt has risen roughly $1 trillion since early last month, when President Biden signed a bill that suspends the debt ceiling until 2025. Federal borrowing surged after Biden signed the debt limit bill due to a pent-up demand. That's because the government was legally unable to borrow more money until the debt ceiling was raised. Treasury Department data has the total national debt at $32.5 trillion as of July 6th. That's $1 trillion more than the $31.5 trillion level on June 2nd. The national debt has risen $4.7 trillion since Biden took office in 2021. A group of over 20 House conservatives has given House Speaker Kevin McCarthy an ultimatum on government funding bills. The group, led by Congressman Scott Perry and Chip Roy, sent McCarthy a letter on Monday. They are threatening to vote against any appropriations bills designed to achieve the top-line spending level. Congress has until the end of September to work out a government funding bill and avoid a shutdown. The GOP members demand funding levels match the amount from fiscal year 2022. They also want all government spending bills to pass through committee before going to the House floor, and demand McCarthy publicly reject the possibility of an omnibus bill. The GOP group also floated the idea of getting Biden to back a border security bill and capping or cutting the Inflation Reduction Act. Without those conditions being met, the Republicans said they see an impossible path to reach 218 Republican votes on appropriations or other measures. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
We have more updates on the court decision in the Biden administration's social media censorship case. A federal judge yesterday denied a request from the Department of Justice.
U.S. District Judge Terry A. Doughty on Monday denied the Justice Department's request to stay his ruling on the Biden administration's social media censorship case. The judge issued an injunction last week limiting government communications with social media firms. That essentially restricts the Biden administration's ability to pressure big tech to censor protected free speech online. In their request for a stay on the ruling, the White House argued that the order could put a damper on law enforcement activity online. The judge rejected the argument, saying his order last week had created exceptions for communications for cyber attacks, election interference, and national security threats. The judge further wrote that Republican attorneys general who brought the suit are most likely going to prevail. In response, lawyers for the Biden administration Justice Department filed an emergency stay of the injunction at the 5th U.S. District Court of Appeals. They argued that Doughty's ruling was too vague and broad. Administration officials previously said their contact with social media companies were an effort to reduce alleged misinformation regarding COVID vaccines. The Biden administration wrote, the district court identified no evidence suggesting that a threat accompanied any request for the removal of content.
The Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to vote later this month on a bill that would create a new code of ethics for the Supreme Court.
This is the first legislative response to the controversy over Justice Clarence Thomas's relationship with a Republican megadonor.
The bill would require transparency when a justice has a connection to a political party. It would also establish a mechanism to investigate code of conduct or other violations.
The Senate Judiciary Committee is set to vote on the bill July 20th, and it will probably pass along party lines.
But once it reaches the Senate floor, the bill is not likely to get the 60 votes needed to overcome any filibuster attempt, and it has no chance of passing in the Republican-controlled House.
And stay tuned, a lawsuit against tech giant Cisco has been revived. The San Jose company allegedly helped China in persecuting a spiritual group.
Also, a watchdog is accusing President Biden's nominee for chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of making race-based hiring decisions.
Tonight, hope prevails in times of adversity. Dr. A.R. Bernard provides a voice of faith in seeking common ground for America's common good. Also, Travis Steffens, creator of the world's first breath app, teaches how breathing is fundamental to hope. That's next on America's Hope.
The stories that need to be told, the voices that need to be heard, the truth that you need to see. Get unbiased and in-depth news. Don't miss a beat. I'm Stephanie Cox. At NTD, we're here for you.
A lawsuit against tech giant Cisco has been revived. The San Jose company allegedly helped China in persecuting a spiritual group, but it was dismissed nearly 10 years ago. Now the judges are continuing the case.
According to the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, a lawsuit that accuses Cisco of helping the Chinese regime's violent persecution of Falun Gong can move forward to trial. Falun Gong is a faith group that's been heavily persecuted in China since 1999. Its adherents filed a lawsuit in 2011 against Cisco, along with its two former executives, longtime CEO John Chambers and Cisco's then vice president for Greater China, Freddie Chung. The plaintiffs were 13 Chinese nationals and a U.S. citizen, Charles Li. The lawsuit alleges the firm supplied technology to help China's communist officials build a vast surveillance network to identify and track Falun Gong practitioners and facilitate their subsequent arrest and torture. In the filing on July 7th, the federal appellate court found the plaintiffs' allegations sufficient for the case to proceed, thus reversing a 2014 lower district court decision to dismiss the case. In a 2-1 opinion reinstating the suit, U.S. Circuit Judge Marcia Berzin wrote, "We conclude that plaintiffs' allegations, accepted as true, are sufficient to state a plausible claim that Cisco provided essential technical assistance to the Dozheng of Falun Gong with awareness that the international law violations of torture, arbitrary detention, disappearance, and extrajudicial killing were substantially likely to take place." Dozheng is the Chinese Communist Party term referring to the violent political campaigns the regime instigates against perceived enemies. Ms. Berzon said that the company's actions, many of which took place on U.S. soil, constitute aiding and abetting the Chinese regime's abuses. The plaintiffs allege that Cisco marketed itself to target dissidents and became a facilitator of the regime's violent suppression of faith by designing and developing a comprehensive apparatus with U.S. technologies and talent in exchange for market access. The system the plaintiffs referred to is Golden Shield, the Chinese surveillance platform that's accessible nationwide in China. Cisco, they said, had designed, crafted, and given critical assistance to implement and fine-tune the Golden Shield project at a time when the regime was incapable of developing one on its own. The plaintiffs allege the resulting product was a surveillance system that can monitor Falun Gong adherents' internet activities in real time to identify, round up, and torture members of the religious group. It also builds detailed and constantly updated profiles of suspected and known Falun Gong adherents that Chinese security officers can retrieve anywhere in the country. They added that the information, including location, family, and contacts, aided the regime in rounding up adherents and coercing them to renounce their faith. Circuit Judge Morgan Kristen, who dissented, said, "I see several sound reasons to decline to recognize a cause of action for aiding and abetting the acts alleged in plaintiff's complaint, and I am deeply concerned about the practical consequences of allowing plaintiffs' claims to go forward without input from the political branches." The plaintiff with U.S. citizenship, Charles Lee, said he was arrested in 2003 for practicing Falun Gong in China. Lee said he was beaten, deprived of sleep and food, and handcuffed in painful positions during his 3-year prison sentence. When he was finally released in 2006, he was also expelled from China. Cisco did not respond by press time for a comment.
A watchdog is accusing a top Air Force official of making hiring decisions based on ideology and race. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the complaint against General C.Q. Brown, President Joe Biden's nominee to be the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
The American Accountability Foundation filed the complaint with the Office of the Air Force Inspector General. It's calling for an investigation into comments made by General Brown it alleges are racist and discriminatory. In this interview with the Washington Post from 2021, Brown discusses how the Air Force can increase the number of black officers serving.
We actually ensure that we have diverse candidates on the list. And the last thing I would say on that is how we encourage and mentor some of those diverse candidates, because sometimes they may feel like they're not qualified.
The Watchdog cites a 2021 interview General Brown did with People magazine where he stated, "We've got to closely manage our diverse populations to make sure their development and opportunities aren't happening by luck," and mentions an interview with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in November 2020 where it says General Brown stated, "I hire for diversity and that I purposely build my office, my front office, and my team with diverse backgrounds." The watchdog says that discrimination by federal officials based on race is prohibited under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The foundation is also calling attention to General Brown's comments regarding the monitoring of the constitutionally protected speech of military personnel's social media. It cites a July 2021 interview with PBS where General Brown stated that recruits' social media should be monitored because people will put things on social media that they'd never say to your face. Brown added that wrong views would be a factor in determining whether a recruit would be accepted. NTD reached out to General Brown's office but didn't hear back by broadcast time. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And now turning our attention to weather, flash floods continue to swamp the northeastern U.S. yesterday.
Torrential rain that began over the weekend overwhelmed rivers, washed out roadways, and killed at least one woman in New York State. She was sadly swept away.
New York and Vermont were the hardest hit states. Vermont officials were calling the flooding the worst since Hurricane Irene reached the state as a tropical storm in 2011. Parts of Vermont had already received between 7 and 8 inches.
Rescue teams from North Carolina, Michigan, and Connecticut were helping to get to towns that have been unreachable. The towns of Londonderry and Weston in Vermont were inaccessible, and rescuers were heading there to do welfare checks. Water levels at several dams were closely monitored.
Roads were closed across the state, including many along the Green Mountains. The heavy rains in the New England area are expected to move out of this region by the afternoon. Stay safe and stay tuned for the weather at the end of the broadcast.
Wow, yeah, those are some serious events. And we're going to have some more news for you coming up. The Kremlin confirms a meeting between Yevgeny Prigozhin and Russian President Vladimir Putin has taken place.
And the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, was attacked by Russian drones this morning. Those stories and more after the break.
Did you know ESG is impacting every part of your life? From rising gas prices to global food shortages to out-of-control inflation, even losing your freedom of speech and being censored on the internet. It's all being driven by ESG ideology. Who's in control? What can you do about it? Find out in The Shadow State, the first documentary exposing ESG. The ESG movement of governments and corporations operates in the shadows. Only the light of truth can expose it. Watch The Shadow State documentary, streaming now.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
It's all good, baby.
Is it really all good?
If you love me enough to routinely test your handyman skills, not to mention the strength of your marriage, then of course you'll visit nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat to make sure I'm in the right car seat.
This is my country, Myanmar. Anti-drug movement.
It's good to have you back with us. Russia launched 28 kamikaze drones on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and on the southern port of Odesa this morning. This just hours before the start of the NATO summit in Lithuania. The Ukrainian military said all drones sent towards Kyiv were intercepted, but debris damaged a number of houses in the region. Over Odesa, 2 drones hit an administration building. There were no injuries reported. President Emmanuel Macron said today that France will provide Ukraine with Scalp long-range cruise missiles to help Kyiv's forces strike targets deep behind Russian lines.
The Kremlin on Monday tried to provide some clarity about Yevgeny Prigozhin's meeting with President Putin. The Kremlin spokesman confirmed the meeting had taken place, but the small details he revealed have created more questions. Here's the story.
Not seen in public since his mutiny threatened Russia's leadership and labeled a traitor by the Kremlin. Yevgeny Prigozhin seen down and out, bound for exile or worse. But now, Moscow acknowledging Vladimir Putin himself hosted Prigozhin and other Wagner commanders inside the Kremlin just 5 days after the uprising. The president listened to the explanations given by the commanders and offered them options for further employment and further military service, the Kremlin spokesman said. This after Kremlin-controlled media spent weeks trashing Prigozhin, like in this segment on a popular show. The reporters saying Prigozhin is not the Robin Hood he tried to pass himself off as. He was a businessman with a criminal past. After the mutiny, the Kremlin had said Prigozhin would essentially be exiled to Belarus. Now, a different tone towards Prigozhin and his fighters. They stressed the fact that they are loyal supporters and soldiers of the head of state and the commander-in-chief, the spokesman says. They said they were ready to carry on fighting for their motherland. It's not clear what prompted Putin to meet Prigozhin, but the Russians currently need all the manpower they can get. The Ukrainians say they're making important but slow gains in the south and east. Kyiv, though, hampered by a major lack of ammo, especially for their artillery guns. That prompted the Biden administration to give the Ukrainians controversial cluster munitions to make up for the shortages in conventional artillery ammo.
This is a war relating to munitions and the running out of that ammunition, and we're low on it.
I spoke to the CEO of Rheinmetall, one of Europe's largest arms manufacturers. Rheinmetall does not produce cluster munitions, but he told me his company is ready to vastly expand its conventional ammo production.
On the artillery ammunition, we produce 100,000 of rounds, and the capacity of next year will be 600,000. So if you see that the need is 1 million, Rheinmetall could deliver, if we deliver only the Ukrainian, 60% of the need.
And the company says it wants to go a step further, servicing and even producing vehicles inside Ukraine, starting with these armored personnel carriers called Fox.
If they always have to wait that Europeans or Americans help them over the next 10 or 20 years, I think that's not possible.
More on Russia. The U.S. has confirmed that it is in talks with Russia for a prisoner swap to bring Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich back home. But those discussions have not produced a clear pathway to a resolution. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Friday said he had a chance to meet with Gershkovich's family and representatives of the outlet to discuss the latest status of the case and efforts to have him released. The journalist was arrested over alleged espionage on behalf of the U.S. government. The outlet denies the allegations. His release may be in exchange for Vladimir Danayev. He is a Russian citizen who faces cybercrime charges in the U.S. Sullivan said he does not want to give false hope and doesn't have a clear answer to how they will return Gershkovich home. The Kremlin recently confirmed Russia was open to discussing a prisoner exchange, but said those talks must be held in private. We're bringing in Lee Smith, the author of The Permanent Coup and the Plot Against the President. He joins us live to discuss this. It's great to have you with us, Lee.
Hey, good morning, Kevin. Thank you, and thanks for bringing me on this morning.
How do these prisoner swap negotiations work?
Well, I mean, we saw the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. He's not just going to be speaking with family members, the family members of Gershkovich, but he's going to be speaking with his Russian counterparts as well. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are other mediating parties involved. I mean, officials from other governments that are on good terms with the U.S., as well as the Russian Federation. And of course, right now, U.S. and Russian relations are not at an all-time low, but they're not in a great place.
Beyond those rocky relations right now, can you think of any other obstacles that would prevent this prisoner swap from going through?
Well, I mean, I think we have to look at the premise of the premise of the. I mean, they've taken him hostage, basically. I mean, we can talk about the premise under which they arrested him, but basically they've taken him hostage, and the real purpose, countries like Russia and Iran and other despotic regimes take Americans prisoner, is to underscore American weakness. And so that's really what's going on right now. So the idea that the Russians could have the White House on the hook and make the White House beg publicly or something to that effect to make Joe Biden look weak, that's a key interest right now for Moscow, right? They're much less concerned about getting home a cyber criminal held in U.S. custody than they are in. Remember, they're at war right now, and the Biden administration is waging a proxy war against them. So anything that Putin can do to make the Biden White House look weaker is a win in their book.
That is an interesting perspective that you bring up there, Lee. I do want to point out that on March 28th, Gershkovich was writing an article, and it wrote, "Russia's economy is starting to come undone." The next day, he was arrested. What do you make of the timing of this detainment?
Well, there's something else, too. Apparently, reportedly, Gershkovich was also reporting on Prigozhin, right? And Prigozhin he led, I don't know if we want to call it a coup, but he certainly led a very serious attack against Putin and Putin forces, right? And so Prigozhin is a very, very sensitive subject right now. And I imagine, we don't have much clarity on this, but I imagine the case that the Russians are making is that contact with Prigozhin suggests that this journalist was doing something bad. Again, that will be their case. Of course, it's nonsense. This guy was out there reporting stories like solid American journalists do. Tragically, there aren't enough really good American journalists left, but this guy appears to have been doing real reporting on the ground. But it was his story on Prigozhin, I think, that is going to be what the Russian government is talking about and what they're holding over the head of the White House.
And I will add here, Lee, that Russia has not produced a shred of evidence to support these espionage charges. Are there any other notable prisoner swaps between the U.S. and Russia that can give us an idea as to how this might play out?
Well, I mean, we saw the most recent one was for basketball player Brittany Griner. So I mean, these are one-for-one deals. There's at least one American prisoner, at least one American held prisoner by the Russians, and that's Paul Whelan, former Marine. He's been there, I believe, since 2018. So he wasn't released in the in the exchange that freed Brittany Griner. And it looks right now, as you were speaking about before, this would be a 1-for-1 deal, and Paul Whelan will tragically linger in a Russian prison, it appears.
Very troubling. Well, do really appreciate your time. Lee Smith, the author of The Plot Against the President, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
And now some short headlines from around the world. Jews and Muslims came together yesterday in Bosnia on the eve of the 28th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre. They met to talk about ways of using their shared pain to help rid the world of hate and bigotry. More than 8,000 Bosniak, mainly Muslim, men and boys were killed in 1995 in Srebrenica by Bosnian Serb troops. The massacre has been declared a genocide by the UN.
In Iceland, police have restricted access to a volcano that has been spewing out life-threatening toxic gas pollution. Residents near the capital, Reykjavik, have been encouraged to sleep with windows closed. The volcano erupted in southwest Iceland yesterday following intense earthquake activity in the area.
A UK minister says banks have been denying services to defense companies over ESG factors. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. James Cartledge, Minister for Defense Procurement, said his ministry has launched an investigation into the impact of ESG rules on the defense industry.
And just ahead, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is in the hot seat. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody says his company's platforms are heavily used in human trafficking cases.
And catfishing, scams, hacking, even AI-generated blackmail. Teens around the world face mounting threats, but there's hope. Learn how you can stay safe online.
Shenyun Creations, the streaming platform from Shenyun, featuring world-class dance, past programs, and all original music. Masterclasses, behind the scenes, comedy, and more. Explore shenyuncreations.com.
Award-winning filmmakers Stephen Barber and Matthew Housley, along with producer Tamara Henry, bring you the world's most dangerous paper route. Never-before-seen images from legendary Stars and Stripes military newspaper.
Don't worry about the bullet with your name on it. Worry about those flying around that say to whom it may concern.
I was a member of the West Point class of 1974. Stars and Stripes was part of our daily existence. In a way, the hometown newspaper of the U.S. military.
I think it's the most important newspaper in the world.
I had a choice between going to Armed Forces Network or to Stars and Stripes, and I picked Stars and Stripes.
Join Vanilla Fire Productions as they head downrange to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Kuwait to follow the world's most dangerous paper route.
These people put their lives on the line continuously.
According to ancient Chinese medicine, purslane is considered a medicinal herb and is used to help lower cholesterol, improve vascular functions, and prevent diabetes. Perilla seeds can nourish the lungs and spleen. It is used to treat asthma and improve pulmonary functions. Puritang green vegetable omega-3 is made from purslane and perilla seeds from Hwangmae Mountain in South Korea. It contains over 90% of omega-3, 6, 7, and 9. The highest concentration possible without chemical additives. The soft gel is made of natural seaweed. It is 100% organic and vegan. Both adults and children can take it with peace of mind. Ancient recipes were passed down from heaven to bring prosperity and longevity. Puritang green vegetable omega-3.
Anyone who's ever sold a home can tell you it is really hard. That's why who you work with matters. Together with Homelight, we've helped thousands of people sell faster and for the best price.
Life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome. Prediabetes does. With early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test today. Go to doihaveprediabetes.org.
Welcome back. Human trafficking is in the spotlight. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody has called on Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg to testify about the heavy use of Meta platforms in trafficking cases. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on a concerning new report.
A Florida human trafficking investigation examined all reported instances of social media platform use in Florida human trafficking cases since 2019. It found that more than half involved Meta platforms Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp. Attorney General Moody invited Zuckerberg to testify before the statewide Council on Human Trafficking. She wants to hear what Meta is doing to prevent its platforms from being used to assist, facilitate, or support human trafficking. Moody said, before launching new products or wasting time preparing for a cage match that will likely never happen, Zuckerberg should be working to make Meta's existing platform safer for users and to prevent vulnerable people from being forced into illicit sex work. Attorney General Moody and the council conducted a statewide study with Florida law enforcement agencies on documented instances of human trafficking involving social media. The survey went out to 80 law enforcement agencies, going to all 67 sheriff's offices and police departments in major Florida cities. Results showed that 146 of the 271 reported instances of social media use in human trafficking were through Meta platforms. According to the 2022 Federal Human Trafficking Report, Facebook was the top platform used in recruitment of human trafficking victims from 2019 to 2022. Facebook and Instagram combined to make up 60% of the top 10 platforms included in the study. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Meta's new social media app Threads is giving some stiff competition to Twitter. CEO Mark Zuckerberg says Threads now has more than 100 million users.
Industry analysts estimate Twitter has just over 350 million worldwide, but usage has been down. They say the number has been dropping for months, with a notable decline in the last few days.
Threads is using Instagram as a springboard. However, Meta says it's not quite the same as Twitter because it won't actively elevate political topics. And Massachusetts lawmakers are considering a ban on buying or selling location data from mobile devices in the state. It would be the first such ban in the U.S. The bill is called the Location Shield Act. It restricts the collection and sale of location data in the state. It would also ban data brokers from giving out location data on residents without court authorization in most cases. Law enforcement would need a warrant to get access. The measure would allow digital services to collect a consumer's location to deliver services for things like weather or Uber.
Moving on to a disturbing phenomenon called sextortion, and it's on the rise. A study found that 65% of Gen Z teens and young adults worldwide are victims of these malicious schemes. The report comes from Snapchat's parent company, Snap Inc. This includes using catfishing scams or hacking to blackmail these young people. Scammers often demand money or more explicit images in exchange for not releasing the content to their friends and family. I wanted to learn more about how you can protect yourself, so I spoke with an expert. Joining me now is Jake Denton, Research Associate at the Heritage Foundation's Tech Policy Center. Jake, it's so good to talk with you about this because these are young people's lives at stake here, and these are some alarming statistics. First, I want to know more about this AI deepfake scam that's going on. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that's right. So, this AI technology has really come out of nowhere for many families, yet it's already beginning to impact them. We're seeing, the rise in telephone scams where a child will actually call the parent and say that they've been kidnapped, and the parent comes to find out that that is not actually their child. It's just a voice emulating software pretending to be the child in order to get money from the parent. And we've also seen even, other types of versions of the same exact scam where, a bad actor will use the public profile of a child's social media to take images and then superimpose their face onto incriminating content, sometimes pornographic in nature, and then blackmail that child or the family with that content for the purpose of, transferring funds or something of that nature. And so, with the rise of AI technology, bad actors have really exploited the slow-moving pace of lawmakers in Washington to take advantage of this new technology in very malicious ways.
Jake, that would just be so horrible for a parent to hear that call about their child being kidnapped. And these are public photos. How can someone protect themselves from that kind of extortion?
Well, I think the first step here is really for parents to understand that their child's social media platforms really should be private. Many kids today still have open social media platforms. They should be locked down. They should really only be their friends from school, if at all. Maybe it's time for parents to have a conversation about deleting the profiles altogether. But another aspect of this, too, is their profile photo. Even if they have a private social media account, if their profile photo is a straight-to-cam shot, they can still pull that same image and use it for these type of deepfakes. And so making sure that there's very minimal content for these bad actors to pull from is the first step, because if there's any resistance or if there's any difficulty to acquire that child's likeness, a lot of times these bad actors will just skip over and go to another person. So make it more difficult for these bad actors to take advantage of your children.
Yeah, deleting the entire profile is one surefire way to do it. Of course, obviously, kids rely on these things for, social networking and things like that. Now, these reports talk about personal imagery and information being stolen. So are there ways for these young adults to prevent having that happen to them?
Yeah, like you said, deleting the profile altogether is a surefire way to eliminate this. But locking down your social media profile, making sure that it's closed and only corresponding with people you know in the real world and that you trust. Don't use this as a way to expand your circle with new friends online, because oftentimes it's not necessarily the person you believe it is. We've seen catfishing exist essentially since the advent of the internet, but bad actors for a very long time have taken advantage of children through those same techniques. And so making sure your child is aware, do not correspond with a stranger on the internet. These are kind of internet fundamentals that we've lost along the way. And, bring that back into the fold, bring that back into your parenting strategy, because it's becoming even more important today.
Well, it's so good that this study came out so we can bring this important issue to light. And I do appreciate your analysis. Jake Denton, Research Associate at the Heritage Foundation's Tech Policy Center. I do really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
YouTuber Logan Paul's popular Prime energy drink is in the crosshairs of Congress.
Senator Chuck Schumer wants the FDA to investigate Prime, saying it has off-the-chart levels of caffeine. Meanwhile, he says its marketing tactics are directed at young people.
That's right, and having too much caffeine is just not healthy for people 18 and under. NTD's Faye Corder has more.
Senator Chuck Schumer has asked the FDA to investigate Logan Paul's Prime energy drink. In a press release, Senate Democrats said that Prime, one of the most in-demand drinks for kids, is, quote, actually a cauldron of caffeine. At around 200 milligrams per every 12 ounces, Schumer says it has more caffeine than a can of Coca-Cola, a Red Bull, and any cup of coffee.
There are side effects from caffeine, so things like increasing your heart rate, increasing your blood pressure. They increase diuresis, they increase your urination, so you can increased risk of dehydration.
Rebecca Carl is a pediatrician from the American Academy of Pediatrics. She says these effects are stronger among children who are more sensitive. Caffeine can also give children headaches, interfere with their sleep, and make them less sensitive to being tired.
When it comes to kids, actually there is really no demonstrated safe amount of caffeine. So under 12, the American Academy of Pediatrics says no caffeine.
Lindsay Malone teaches nutrition at Case Western Reserve University. She says that for kids over 12 and under 18, a maximum of 100 milligrams is recommended. That's about 3 cans of Coca-Cola.
Prime Energy says that this drink is not for under 18s. It has a tremendous amount of caffeine. It has about twice as much caffeine as a Red Bull. But where do you find that kids shouldn't drink Prime Energy? In the fine print.
David Monahan is the campaign director at Fair Play, a nonprofit that wants to end marketing to children. Monahan says that saying the drink is for people 18 and over only in the fine print doesn't work. He says this is because Paul and KSI are blasting teens on social media that they should buy this drink.
They're out there on all the platforms where kids and teens are saying, this drink is great. You'll be cool if you drink it. If you live an active lifestyle, you need it. You're going to be popular if you drink this drink.
Senator Schumer says that Prime's website features insufficient warnings about caffeine content, despite the eye-popping amount. He wants the FDA to investigate Prime's health claims, as well as the social media influencer-centric marketing style. Faye Quarter, NTD News.
You know, I gave up caffeine a long time ago. It was the caffeine withdrawals that got me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just nixed it.
That's interesting. Well, you know, I'm still with, I don't think I can make this early without caffeine yet, but, you know, I had a friend in high school that got heart palpitations sometimes because she drank too many energy drinks.
Oh,
yeah.
That's really troubling.
Well, yeah.
What about an apple? That's a really good way to get
an apple
quick
instead
boost
of,
of energy.
I'll try it certainly, but I can't promise anything. Let's see what my state is tomorrow. If I'm not at the top of my game, you'll know what happened.
I see. And talking about things that we take in, how about a free lunch? On Tuesday, Subway restaurants are giving away up to 1 million 6-inch subs to showcase their new deli slice meats. To get a free stub, you'll need to physically go to a participating location between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. and choose a 6-inch sub from their new Deli Heroes lineup menu. The company invested more than $80 million in new deli meat slicers for 20,000 restaurants. They're doing this to show off the new products. There's only one free sandwich allowed per person, and they won't take any other coupons.
I'm not a big fan of long lines, which I assume the Subway will have, but hey, free sandwich, why not?
Yeah, you could try it out, I guess. And we're going to have more news for you coming up. What is the relationship between bone marrow and leukemia? We sat down with the health correspondent to have it explained. We'll have that story after this break.
My dad's name was David. He always talked about getting life insurance, and now it's too late.
No one was expecting my husband Dave to suffer from a heart attack. We didn't have life insurance. We thought we had more time.
Don't be Dave, and don't wait until it's too late to get the life insurance coverage you need. And if you don't have enough insurance to cover funeral costs, credit card debt, and other expenses, your family is going to get stuck with the bill. Call now to get affordable life insurance.
Just call
800-494-1562.
If you're over 50, you can't be turned down for this insurance, regardless of your health. Plus, there's no medical exam, no health questions. Your rate will never go up. Your coverage will never go down. And rates start as low as $5 a week. Remember, don't be Dave. Call now.
Call now.
800-494-1562.
2023, the 10th NTD International Classical Chinese Dance Competition aims to promote the traditional art of classical Chinese dance. From September 4th to 7th, top dancers from around the world will compete in skill and showcase talent at the Sugarloaf Performing Arts Center in New York. The gold award is $10,000. Apply now at dance.ntdtv.com.
According to Marx, everything must be seen through the lens of oppressor and oppressed. Our property rights have continued to get weaker. The threat of these takings is no longer just for public use, but also for better use. This means that the government can force the exchange of property from one private citizen to another private citizen. This is nowhere near the Founding Fathers' intentions. We now have a record share of Americans that have never been married, I being one of them. In fact, the median age of a first marriage has never been higher. Now you may be thinking this is only affecting single adults. Well, not exactly. According to Pew Research, 1 in 4 parents living with their child are unmarried. And let's take a look at how many children are currently living with either one parent or no parent.
Welcome back. On the topic of health, keeping your bone marrow strong and healthy can mitigate the risk of developing leukemia. We brought in our health correspondent and host of Vital Signs, Brendan Falun, to explain.
When I think about bone, I think of the skeleton in my biology class, or like a dried carcass out in the desert somewhere. And we tend to think of this kind of rigid, dry substance, but bone is actually, it's a living, growing organic structure. And remarkably, inside bone is this bone marrow, and that is the source of our blood cells, of the platelets, the red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma. And your white blood cells are crucial for the immune system, for moderating inflammation. Your red blood cells are what are transporting the oxygen from your lungs to other parts of the body. Your platelets are what cause the clotting in your arteries. If you bleed, so it's preventing, if you have an injury, it prevents you from bleeding too much or bruising too much. So, I mean, just as one example, getting back to the white blood cells, they have that role in boosting the immune system. So that's going to help counter cancer. It's going to prevent, reduce your chances of cancer.
So can you go in a little bit more detail on how the health of the bone marrow actually affects the health of our blood cells as well?
Because the bone marrow is basically the production factory for our blood cells. It's where the white blood cells are made. It's where the red blood cells are made, the platelets, the plasma. So if you're supporting your bone marrow health, you're supporting that function to create these vital blood cells of the body.
Oh, very interesting. Now, when we talk about the types of cancers, which ones is it any type of cancer?
Well, I mean, in terms of bone marrow, we're generally talking about leukemia, which is the cancer of the blood-producing tissues of the body. Leukemia ranks about number 10 in the U.S. as far as how common it is among cancer. Breast cancer being the most common, number 1, and then prostate cancer and lung cancer. And in the U.S., there's around 60,000. They project this year in 2023 around 60,000 cases of leukemia, and about 24,000 people projected to die from leukemia this year.
That's quite prevalent. Now, what can people do then to strengthen bone marrow? And maybe what other ways are there to prevent that type of cancer?
I think with so many things to do with our health, it comes back to our diet for one. And if you look at what's needed for the production of blood cells in the bone marrow, you have like vitamin B12, folate are both essential for the creation of the DNA that's in the blood cells. So those are things you can supplement. Another really crucial one is iron. This is within the red blood cells is hemoglobin, and this is what actually transports the oxygen to the other parts within that cell, to other parts of the body. And iron is a crucial component of hemoglobin. But we waste so much of the animals that we eat. I mean, they call it, it's called offal, the different organs like the heart, the liver that can actually be eaten, and in many cultures they do commonly eat these things. But take the liver, for example. It's a very rich source of iron. So that's one way to really increase the amount of iron in your diet. And on top of that, there's protein. You want to be eating lean meats, eggs, fish, legumes, nuts. These will increase the amount of protein. That's also a raw ingredient for blood cell production.
I think it sounds like there is a lot of small adjustments people can make that will make a big difference in their lives. So thank you so much for those tips, Brendan Falun. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Just a fascinating interview, and I find health so interesting how when you actually eat an item that corresponds to that part in your body, it helps. Like bone broth, for example, can be beneficial for bones.
Yeah, and also something like walnuts you mentioned, right? Depending on what they look like. Yeah, and once again, we're on the topic of diet. Just seems so important, right?
Yeah, walnuts, they look like the brain. Healthy. They're good for the brain. Tomatoes, what color are they?
Red.
Yeah, so is blood.
Building. Yeah.
And it helps with blood circulation,
There we go.
It's wild stuff.
some tips for you before we sign off here. That's all for today's program. We'd love to hear from you at goodmorning@ntd.com. Write us if you want. Thanks for watching. I'm Evelyn Lee.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.
Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Did you know YouTube only keeps selective videos on its platform? So if you want to make sure you get the full picture, just subscribe to our newsletter. Go to newsletter.ntd.com and sign up. It's free.